Welcome to the Politics and Media Show with me, John Rees. The European movement against the face veil is now widespread, with calls to implement a ban, or a ban already in place, in France, Belgium, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Scandinavia and Germany. The banning and criminalisation of the Muslim face veil tests the very foundations of modern liberal society. This is the stark warning which is being made in a new report, which examines moves to legislate against the face veil. Now, before we discuss this report, let's take a look at this short report.
Less than 1% of Muslim women wear the face covering veil in Western European countries. The burqa, or niqab, is much more commonly worn in countries like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, where the tradition dates back centuries. However, a number of countries have seen fit to either ban or attempt to outlaw the wearing of face covering veils in public. Now a new report has warned that the banning and criminalising of the Muslim face veil tests the very foundation of modern liberal society. The paper, Reasons to Ban, the anti-burqa movement in Western Europe, examines the move to legislate against face veiling. The authors from Queen Mary University of London and the University of Sussex argue that the current rush to legislate comes in the context of what they see as a backlash against multiculturalism that has been developing across Europe. They note that in France and other countries, security, identification and order have been central to legislative debates since the 9/11 attacks. What was previously thought tolerable has now become unacceptable and moreover subject to the law. The legislation which has criminalised face veiling has clearly originated with the belief that face veiling does not fit with European society, cultures and values, and has all manner of disagreeable, if not downright dangerous implications, especially for women. Legislators have sought to impose a particular narrative of the face veil, and it's unfortunate that they have taken it upon themselves to declare a position strongly against face veiling based on a number of narrow grounds. Leaning on the law stifles what might otherwise be a natural dialogue among Muslims and non-Muslims about the veil's significance and future in Europe. The European movement against face veiling is now widespread, with calls to implement a ban or a ban being in place in France, Belgium, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Scandinavia and Germany. There is no immediate likelihood of a ban in the UK, but there have already been attempts, with one MP in 2010 introducing a private member's bill to Parliament advocating the banning of face-covering garments in public places.
Well, with me to discuss this is Dr Prakash Shah, Senior Lecturer in the School of Law at Queen Mary University and one of the authors of the report. On the phone we have Abeer Firaou, who's a Muslim writer, an activist and chair of the Assembly for the Protection of the Hijab. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Prakash, this is a kind of unexpected but widespread illiberal moment now in Europe, isn't it?
Yes, but actually it's been going on for something like 10 years already. You know, there's been a gradual momentum being built up, and you can see that now the legislative moves against particular type forms of dress associated with Muslim women in particular have been legislated against in various European countries, but also now we hear there's recent evidence in Canada. So it's sort of a kind of spreading movement.
And do you date the beginnings of this process from the way in which Islam was used as part of the sort of ideology to justify the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq?
Actually, I think there are good grounds for thinking that, because it's only in the last decade or so that this whole movement has suddenly sprung up. And so one can see the correlation between military intervention in Afghanistan on the part of NATO countries. And in fact, they seem to be also, NATO countries seem to be the protagonists insofar as legislative moves against burqa, veiling and so on have been concerned. So there are strong grounds for thinking that there is a relationship.
Abeer, welcome to the programme. From your point of view, what do you think is driving this this now pan-European and possibly beyond Europe attempts to make a full face veil illegal?
Assalamu alaikum. Well, I think what's been happening in the European countries is alarming, actually, for the Muslim communities. We look for the Muslim communities to be as part and parcel of the communities that they live within. But these legislations, unfortunately, are preventing that. Muslim women are part of the society, and they look to be part of the social mainstream within their communities. However, for example, in the French government, they have left all the problems and the social problems, and they focused on very minor number of women who wear the face veil. They left all the domestic violence, and they left all of the other economic issues, and they have the time to legislate for this minor number of women in Europe. I don't think we can think of this issue away from the increase of the control and increase of the impact of the far right in most of the European countries. For example, in the recent elections in the UK and in France. However, at the same time, we have to think of the other issues that are mentioned in the paper, and I have read most of the paper, actually. I think they are right in saying that this is a backlash in the multiculturalism in Europe, and in the impact of the 9/11, the impact of the increased fear of the Islamophobia in the European countries.
Prakash, let's just pick up on that, on the point that Abeer made there about the far right. To what degree do you think the far right is driving the legislative agenda of the mainstream, or do you think that the legislative mainstream parties are creating a space for the far right, or is it a bit of both?
Yes, I think it's the right answer is probably that it's a bit of both. But it is very interesting how some of this sort of anti-face veiling agenda has been espoused by mainstream parties as well, and not slightly outside of the political spectrum. Also, the way in which civil society organisations often are involved in campaigning in favour of banning certain types of dress of Muslim women. So I think it's sort of a fairly widespread movement in different countries in Europe. Of course, the situations in different countries are different, but you will find that there is a kind of, a whole swathe of either the population, the political movement, or civil society organizations tend to either silently be in favor or actively campaign for legislative moves.
Do you think that one of the differences, partly because of the connection with the whole ideology around the war on terror, is that this is much more driven by the mainstream parties? I mean, if you think about the kind of similar racism and far-right organisations, say, in the 1970s, by and large they were shunned by the mainstream, and really very little of their rhetoric, perhaps with the exception of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, was echoed by the mainstream parties. And Powell, we must remember, was sacked for his speech. But this is coming directly from the top, and it's endorsed directly from the British Prime Minister and the French President and so forth and so on. That's quite a big difference, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, many scholars are beginning to describe this as a kind of crisis within liberalism. One of our German colleagues describes it as a form of repressive liberalism. So, it's sort of, there's an internal contradiction within liberalism itself, where non-liberal methodologies or tactics are used to achieve certain other ends of liberalism. So there is a kind of great crisis with respect to this issue within Western culture, one would say, and within Western legal systems. But to just sort of go on with respect to the other point you raised about how widespread public opinion or political opinion is with respect to this issue, if you look at the vote in Belgium, where the face veiling has been banned, you find that all but a single MP were in favour of legislating against the ban. And in Belgium, the legislation is to the effect that women wearing the ban will be directly penalised, whereas in France you see that men who attempt to force women to wear a veil or burqa or whatever could themselves be open to to a penalty. But in Belgium, they're targeting the women directly. And it's interesting, the one dissenting MP in Belgium describes her experience as being quite horrendous, you know, because she stood out, and actually she felt very threatened in holding on to her dissenting position within the parliament. So something very frightening is going on there.
Abeer, I mean, when you're campaigning on this issue, do you think that there's going to have to be essentially a campaign that takes place outside the political establishment, or do you think that there are any allies within the political establishment who are feeling disquiet about these developments?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, when you're campaigning against these developments, do you think that it's a campaign that's taking place mostly outside the political establishment, or do you think that you have some allies, at least within the political establishment?
Actually, both. Actually, we managed to campaign, and many of the MPs and MEPs actually were supporting us, and we contacted many of the members of the European Parliament in their countries, and we translated a written declaration into, at the time it was 15 countries in the EU. We translated that and we sent it, and we actually managed to get many of them supporting us. Unfortunately, the written declaration was not passed through the process in the European Parliament. However, the support coming from the politicians was very impressive. However, at the same, the impact from our campaign was in the countries that, especially in France and the UK, managed to have some form of support from the public and from especially the educational system. And now in the UK, the educational system allows the girls to have the uniform in a wide range, or from choosing what they would like to wear, and we managed through a committee with the LEA to have the hijab and the long skirt as part of the uniform, as far as they are with the same colors and the material and the rest of the uniform legislations. So what we are saying is that the Muslim women actually are part of the society. What this legislation is doing is actually it's preventing Muslim women who chose to wear the niqab from being part of the societies. The niqab is a choice. I mean, she chooses that, and for the men who actually trying to liberate, between two quotations, that to liberate her from having the veil itself. What they are doing is actually they are forcing and they are imposing, their legislations on them. As far as she is wearing the niqab, as far as she is not threatening anybody else, as far as she's keeping herself to herself, she's not imposing any threat to the society. Why not to leave her to choose whatever she likes to choose to wear? And if she's, for example, in identity checks, she will adhere by regulations, then why not to leave her? In this case, I would like to raise a point that I'm aware that some of the Jewish community, some of the sectors in the Jewish community, they do actually wear a full niqab, a full face cover, and they are allowed to live in the society. So I would like to raise a question: is it a legislation against the Muslims themselves? How is this legislation gonna challenge those Jewish women who live in societies? Is it just for the Muslims, or is it for other members of the society? So I think myself, this is an increase in Islamophobia, fear from Islam. Muslim women are part of the society. Muslim women are looking forward to integrate and build their societies and their communities. And many of these Muslim women are not coming from, countries from outside Europe. They are actually Europeans themselves. They were raised up this country. They originated in these countries, and they are looking forward to build their country. So it's not a matter of people who are asylum seekers, or people who are coming for a wealth or housing, or I don't know, whatever benefits they have in the European countries. It's a matter of an increase in Islamophobia, I think.
Prakash, let me just, Abeer was raising a specific question in relationship to some women in the Jewish community, but let me make a broader point here. It is a short-term memory loss on the part of the European political establishment, surely, to be moving down this road when equally invented or magnified differences with the Jewish community were so disastrous in the 1930s. I mean, you can't help but look at this and have an uncomfortable feeling that something very, very bad is being relived here, can you?
Yes. I think it is probably an arguable point to make that this is not about religious otherness in general. This legislation, as Ms. Firaou herself suggests, is actually directed at Muslims, and I think there are very good grounds and lots of evidence for thinking.
Is it technically so, or is it phrased in a way that disguises that fact by saying that anybody doing this will be subject to these penalties, but in fact it is only operative in the case of Muslims?
Yes, I think all the examples of legislation you'll see are seemingly neutral on their face. But of course, everybody kind of knows and acknowledges.
So I think the
proponents as well as the
there is something
victims.
hidden behind the veil in the
Yes.
question of legislation. Then,
yes, absolutely. But there's very little doubt if we were to make the argument that this is an anti-Muslim sort of thing, and I think I do congratulate people like Ms. Firaou who are sort of speaking out and so on. And I think one of the important sort of things what Muslims themselves probably have to stand up and make their views known to the political establishments of all of these countries, including the European politicians that Ms. Firaou talks about. Because of course it's about standing up and being counted, but it's, as she says, it's also about being recognized as citizens, who have rights in this as equal participants within the society.
Abeer, let me ask you about the practical effects on the lives of the women who are at the sharp end of this legislation, because things that are said in Parliament and legislation that's passed often has the effect on the streets of increasing the level of abuse, sometimes of assault. Is that happening in this case?
Yes, indeed, actually. I mean, one recent incident about a woman with a veil. She was going in France to buy something from the supermarket, and she was assaulted by the lady who actually served her. And she lifted the face veil to show her that she's actually French, originally French, and she's white, and she spoke with her with a normal accent. And she told her, I chose to wear the niqab. I haven't come here for any other benefit to the French society. So basically, I think as mothers or as women who are looking for a job or women who are looking to integrate with the society, I think these legislations are preventing them from going out, from dealing with normal lives. For example, she's a mother. She's going to a school in France. She's asking about her, her son or daughter. She's prevented from entering the main door without taking her full veil off, or actually sometimes with the hijab. Incidents that we have recorded that even the hijab, she's not allowed to go into the school premises without unveiling herself. So things like that are actually preventing women from being integrated within the society. However, what I say, I have to emphasize, this is a very, very minor percentage of the community within the European countries. I myself, I don't wear the niqab, I wear the hijab. And I think being out there, being outspoken and, having your voice out as Muslim women, we need to explain what Islam is. We need to explain what is the role of Muslim women in the society. This is very important as mothers, as teachers, I myself, I did my PhD at a higher university in the UK, and I didn't find any difficulty with having my hijab on and attending a higher education and institution and achieving a high degree in my career. So what I'm saying is, I think there is 2 points in here in this discussion. One is on the party of the legislators who are who are making these legislations and who are afraid of the increase of Islam in these countries. And the second point is the role of Muslim women who are currently, who live in these societies and who have a great role about explaining and going out there and being outspoken and having an impact in their societies. So we need to explain, but at the same time, we need the freedom to be heard. We need the freedom to be listened to in terms of the politicians, in terms of the other, members of the public, being supported as in living in multicultural society. Having a multicultural society is a benefit for all, because you would reduce all of these, terrorism acts or all of these not having a secure and a stable society. Look at France, what's happening in France, because they have increased all of these legislations. The Muslim community have sort of came down to themselves. They've become sort of isolated, and I have many contacts with the French sisters there, and they are actually struggling to come out of the country, to leave the country and leave to any other country that welcomes the hijab and welcomes Muslim women to work. They are unable to find a job in France or any other, like for example, Belgium or any other European country that have ban on the hijab or niqab. So really, what we are looking for is not being threatened in these societies, but rather to live in a stable society and to have the freedom to have our religion.
Okay, Abeer, well, I'll have to stop you there because that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for your contribution to the programme, and to Prakash Shah for his. Please do stay tuned for the second part of the Politics and Media programme. Welcome back to part 2 of the Politics and Media show. Well, could you live off just £1 a day? That's the challenge that's been taken up by a group of Muslims last week as they sought to raise money for some of the poorest people in the world. The campaign Live Below the Poverty Line is the work of the Global Poverty Project and aims to raise awareness of the 1.4 billion people around the world who live on less than $2 per day. Well, before I introduce our studio guest, let's take a look at how the activists from the youth organisation Made in Europe got on with living on just £1 a day for a week.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Hi, it's day 3. We're just having lunch. We're at the Made in Europe office. We're doing a kind of come dine with me on the cheap. So we've got a few staff here, a few supporters and friends.
I think the food deprivation is getting to Nadeem a bit.
No interviews to have eaten.
Okay, Nadeem, do you want to tell us
Please, can we do it after, like, after a few spoons of food?
Nadeem, come on, pull it together. Tell us what we're doing.
We're having lunch together. We're dining below the line. Who can do that voice? Who can do that voice?
I don't know, what is the voice?
Come down with your voice.
So we've come to share our lunch together, but it seems that everyone's food is of the same colour. The Algerian Jackdaw rice. So we seem to have a general yellowish theme to our food.
Yeah, there's a lot of yellow in our food.
Yeah, apparently we all like our turmeric. Go. Can you tell us about your soup, Shabana?
Yes, it's got 2 onions, 2 carrots, no hang on, I can't go. 2 onions, 2 carrots, 2 tomatoes, and half a kilo of lentils.
And it looks delicious.
It is delicious, it's got some spices in it too.
And what have you got for lunch today, Matt?
Glow in the dark carrot soup. Quite how it's achieved that colour, I've no idea. It's about 3 carrots.
And Dean, how you doing? Can I just say you were considerably more enthusiastic about this dal 2 days ago?
I have 3 days old, or 2 days old, dal with chopped tomatoes and a handful of kidney beans.
As into the...
Well, can I just say you're all considerably luckier than me, who is having my leftover porridge for lunch. Because I've yet to finish it from breakfast, because it looks like glue.
We've just been really talking about the kind of different experiences and feelings and thoughts that have come to us in the last few days. One of them is all about actually how lucky we are to have diverse foods. Something you take for granted, you go in, You have a whole range of fruits and vegetables and different meats and cuts and that you choose from. We've we've been eating the same thing all week, so we've got kind of different variations of lentils, but it's lentils nonetheless. Bread and rice, which is in the microwave. So we've been eating this for 3 days now, and already it's getting to us. A lot of people say kind of, why are we doing this? None of this is really about guilt or about feeling guilty about being privileged, or it's really just about understanding, one, how lucky we are, two, knowing that actually the role we play, the impact we play as consumers, and the relationship we have with people elsewhere, and three, just really being grateful for what we have. So that's me really.
As I was saying earlier, I miss having like a choice of what to eat. I miss being able to snack. I miss having variety in my meals, and I really miss solid food. Like, everything I eat is liquid almost, apart from like toast. And you can complain, but at least like I feel full. I'm eating enough stuff. I've got enough food to feel full. And there's people around the world living on £1, less than £1 a day for everything, not just for their food.
Yeah, I've been kind of like thinking along the same lines as Oussama really, and kind of about the interconnectedness of poverty abroad and here. So if you're living on less, in this country, you can't afford to go out and buy and make food choices that benefit people in the developing world, like by buying fair trade or like sustainably sourced goods and stuff, even like in this country, that locally produced stuff. And that's something that struck me the other day, because I quite like buying, whenever I can, like fair trade and locally grown stuff as well if I can. But obviously that's gone straight out the window this week. So it was just a thought that sort of struck me yesterday.
Well, with me in the studio to discuss this is Stephen Brown of the Global Poverty Project, the organisation behind the Live Below the Line campaign, Nick Dearden of the Jubilee Debt campaign, and Oussama Mezoui, a campaigner who was the Made in Europe project that was involved in this latest campaign, and who's part of a group of young European Muslims who are fighting to bring global poverty and injustice to all our attention. He recently lived on £1 a week for 5 days. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Stephen, so what were you hoping for from the impact of this campaign?
So we asked people to live on £1 a day for 5 days, and the point of it really is to get people to a point where they have a much better and deeper understanding of the issues of extreme poverty, and also to the point where they want to take more action on the issue. So what we do through the campaign is ask them to live on a very small amount of money. It's not trying to replicate extreme poverty anyway, it's to give people, shine a light on extreme poverty, if you like, put yourself in a position where you don't have choices about food, where it makes you think about the fact that if you get on a train and you forget your bottle of water, you can't just buy another bottle of water. You've got to remain thirsty for the 4 hours you're on the train. And it really gets you thinking about the choices that people in extreme poverty have to make. It's not between whether I have a nice bottled water or tap water. It's the difference between having some water or taking your sick child to the hospital. And so by gaining that deeper understanding, we hope that people will take more action on extreme poverty in the future.
Nick, I mean, one of the points that was made in the film, and I thought it was an important one, is that living on food that costs £1 a day is actually an underestimation of the problem, because what we're talking about is people who have £1 a day, period, for everything. So actually the poverty is even greater than this campaign represents.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, if everybody who's involved in the campaign still gets to go home and sleep at their house and so on, they still get to use the microwave, as you saw there, and all that kind of thing that many people in the world don't have access to. So, yeah, I mean, I think a bit like you said, it's not really a replication of extreme poverty, but I think the important thing for us, as you were saying, is that it inspires people to take some action against the kind of injustices like hunger that are going on in the world, because there is no need in today's world for people to be hungry when we have enough food in the world. So it's to get people to a stage where they can start thinking about the power that is responsible for so much of the poverty and inequality that exists in the world.
We're not going to eradicate extreme poverty by pretending to be poor. I mean, that's not what we're saying. What we're trying to do is give people a deeper understanding of it so they continue to fight for the eradication of extreme poverty with a range of organisations. I mean, we don't just ask people to then take further challenges for the Global Poverty Project. We find out what people are interested in and pass them on to organisations who do some of that work, like the Jubilee Debt campaign.
I think, first of all, I had no idea the video was going to appear in public, so
I'll have to see who's
it's a little
responsible.
bit like This Is Your Life.
Who's responsible for that? Really, it was quite a jovial video, but what doesn't come across is the fact that people can't live off £1 a day, and that's a reality. We could go to bed on a full stomach and go to Asda and buy, smart priced produce. But the reality is that, number one, people can't live on £1 a day because of, like we said, not only are they paying for food, but they're also trying to pay for education and health and travel, etc., etc. But also, actually, there are major side effects and consequences to living on £1 a day. So we're talking about not having enough food, so although you may not be starving, you're malnourished, which then, for example, has an impact on maternal health, the number of women who die every day because they're malnourished, which leads to hemorrhaging and other consequences. Children, for example, who, although we're not starving, are malnourished, undernourished, therefore have stunted growth, and that affects their education, it affects their income. So really, I mean, what doesn't come across from that very short clip at the beginning is that although we could do it, they simply can't. And although they may be living, the actual consequences of that is very, very grave. And in the long term, it's leading to deaths. It's leading to very low.
Which way is it going generally? Is the global poverty problem being solved, or is it actually getting worse? Because you hear many people saying, "Oh well, there's, despite the current recession, over a period of time, there's growth in the system, and we'll all get richer and better, including the very poorest." Is that what's happening?
There is a ridiculous amount of misinformation out there about the effectiveness of aid, and nobody in the sector is ever going to pretend that aid is a silver bullet solution to it, or it's always completely effective. But if you look at global poverty statistics over the past, say, my lifetime, 28 years. So 28 years ago, there was around 44% of the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's only 28%. So we've made a huge impact. It's not just aid, it's partnerships with government, it's part debt relief, it's part progressive tax, it's all of these things together, but we are making a huge amount of progress on it. Another example is polio. In the last 18 years, we've reduced polio by 99%. There's only 1% left of cases of polio in the last 18 years. So aid is having an incredible amount of impact, and what we hope the campaign will do as well is maybe kind of abolish some of those myths around aid. There was a Conservative MP today, I think his name was Philip Davis, who came out and said that the UK are mugs for giving as much money away in aid as they currently do, and we currently give away, we're about 0.6%, which is just off where the UN asks the G8 countries to be. And he said that we were mugs because we give away so much money. We're talking about 0.7% of our gross national income. To you and I, that's about 19 pence a day. And with that 19 pence, we know from different figures that they're going to be sorting a 68 million children will be vaccinated over the next 2 years. For that, 78 million people will be having access so that they can access to tools so they can start small businesses. I don't feel like a mug for spending 19 pence a day on international aid.
If I can come in on that, I think there's no doubt whatsoever that aid is very important. But I think we should also be honest in saying that actually, while aid is important and it's necessary, what we need to also be talking about is actually some of the structural problems.
Yeah.
And the structural problems won't be dealt with aid. And that's the reality. Aid is important. We should be giving 0.7%, if not more, in aid. But the reality is that we need people to understand that actually there are structural problems, that unless we deal with them, this will continue. So if we're talking about malnutrition, for example, and we're talking about lack of access to food, this is because we have a food cycle, a food system that's fundamentally not working. And that's because of international trade. That's because of climate change. That's because of the power that big multinational retailers have in the market. And this requires campaigning. It needs people to go out there and actually to engage with the retailers, to engage with politicians, to engage with thinkers and policy makers, and actually to grapple with these issues, and not just to give money and aid. I mean, we Made in Europe, we work in the Muslim community, and we see that actually there is a massive emphasis in the Muslim community on giving aid, which again is important and necessary. But what we're really campaigning for is that the next step up. Actually, we need campaigning with aid. And so while we should continue fundraising, continue giving aid, we also need to start encouraging really organisations to take up campaigning and to get people to understand that actually, just like in the past, whether it's apartheid or other problems we've faced in history, that actually this is a man-made problem. And if we're going to tackle malnutrition, if we're going to tackle some of the problems we're dealing with, we need people to campaign. And I think that for me was really key in actually doing Live Below the Line, because on the one hand people were raising money for their respective organisations, but also there was an element of campaigning, of raising awareness, of getting people to understand that actually there are these structural problems. and we need to actually start engaging with them.
Nick, I mean, that's an important point, isn't it? Because, I mean, unless people, as has actually happened, we give generation after generation after generation. If we want to stop that, then the structural problems have to be dealt with. What would you say are the main structural issues that produce global poverty?
There is an enormous amount, and it's getting worse, of inequality in the world today. And that's, I think, the important thing to say as well, that poverty isn't just about people living at starvation level. Poverty is about your relative experience of being able to access your rights and power and so on vis-à-vis everyone else in society. And there are many issues that fuel that. One is the enormous growth of the financial sector that we've seen and the rule of financial power that we see in the world today. We've lived through, here in the West, a financial crisis created by these forces built on this inequality of ordinary people in our society, but actually very little is being done to rein in that power, to rein in the power of multinational corporations. We work on debt, the whole issue of developing countries becoming indebted from the 1970s onwards to major banks and international financial institutions, and having to far more money still leaves many of these countries than comes in aid or in any other form. There's massive tax avoidance, which accounts for hundreds of billions of pounds a year. That is being removed from where it should rightfully be in developing countries. So I do think there's a problem when you have a government like ours here in the UK, which talks a lot about aid and talks a lot about its role and responsibility in the world, but at the same time is at the forefront of putting a set of policies in place that are depriving developing countries of the wealth which is theirs, of fostering a system of inequality and injustice. And I think it's very, very important that we look behind just the rhetoric on aid, because that can cover up an enormous amount of injustices and problems that Western governments are still basically pushing on the rest of the world.
Well, let me ask you all about this then, because starting with Stephen, because I mean, in many ways, this is the crux of the matter. Do you think that too many charity organisations shy away from dealing with this? I mean, shouldn't they be saying, okay, give what you can, but you're going to be giving forever unless we deal with some of this stuff? And do you think they fight too shy of that?
I don't think so, no. I don't think they get the coverage that they deserve, and the strength of the coverage and the lobbying that goes on behind the scenes with the government. I think it's absolutely right that there is hypocrisy here when you talk a lot about, the government talks a lot about aid and then puts in policies that make it really difficult for that aid to be effective, essentially, or for that overall strategy to be effective. I mean, one of the things that I think would really help that is if the government had come through on its promise to legislate on 0.7 in aid. Because if we had legislated 0.7, the debate would move away from how much we give in aid and would move very much more towards how effective that aid is and a much more robust and overall strategy to tackle global extreme poverty. So I think if the government in the Queen's speech said that they reconfirmed their commitment to 0.7, but they didn't legislate on it, and I think that's a shame. I think it would have gone some way to beginning to bring that debate to the forefront.
Nick?
But hang on a minute. I mean, aid is so minuscule, the amount you're talking about. They've already said they're going to reach 0.7%. There are many more important things that our government can be doing than saying, putting in legislation what we're going to be doing anyway. A couple of weeks ago, our government was absolutely at the forefront of a group of Western countries lobbying for a UN agency called UNCTAD to be able to do less work in terms of producing reports and doing research showing the impact that unfair trade rules, debt and financial institutions were having on developing countries, because it wants the IMF, which are controlled by countries like our own, to have that role. Now, there's been 30 years here of the British government and other governments removing the voice of developing countries and placing it in the hands of a very select number of institutions that are controlled by Western governments. Democracy has been eroded across the world in this way. Debt has removed the power of governments to be able to do what their citizens want and to respect the rights of their citizens. Aid can never ever take the place of a democratic government being able to do what its citizens want, to provide public services and so on in a democratic way. I agree with aid insofar as I agree with redistribution, both within our own society and at a global level. We have much more. There are very wealthy people here. We should redistribute that money. But that money should not then be controlled by our governments it should be treated in the same way as tax is treated in our own country. It should be a form of global taxation.
Oussama, what do you reckon on this?
I think too often we know this, that aid is given with clauses, and those clauses actually work against developing countries. I'll say it again, aid is important, it's necessary, we should be giving aid. But I think the emphasis really should be on some of the structural problems. If we look at a small issue, for example, that of subsidisation, in the EU, farmers are subsidised. So they produce a certain crop, they produce as much as they like of that crop, and they are guaranteed a certain price from the government. Now actually, European governments actually don't allow that to happen in developing countries. So in Africa, for example, farmers are not given that luxury. What that means then is that actually places like Africa, where there's major exportation, they're having to pay very high export fees, taxes, and their own markets are being flooded with cheaper crops. And this all has consequences. So we need to really look at the policies, we need people to engage with these policies, we need campaigners, us, really the masses, to understand that there are these problems and to go out there and to engage with our politicians and to say, you know what, this really isn't good enough. I mean, we always say, for example, that multinationals say that power lies with the consumers. Well, that's true to a certain extent, and we encourage people to be responsible, for example, what they eat, what they consume, how they behave as consumers. That's important. So buying ethical food, buying fair trade, all of this is very important. But we also know that actually it's a bit of a smoke screen, because large multi-corporations, what they do is actually make available what's profitable to them. So they're actually controlling price, they're controlling what's being produced, and we're seeing increasingly so farmers have less, producers have less and less say, and their governments have less and less say, because they're indebted, because there are clauses to the debts and the loans that they have taken. So yes, aid is important. We have, for example, the famine in East Africa right now. That's a great example where we need money there quickly. And so fundraising and emphasis on money there is important, because we need to provide food for these people. But if we're looking, I was reading the Global Atlas on Inequality. Some things that really startled me. 27% of children who die in Egypt, for example, die because of malnutrition. These are things that really people don't talk about. The major emphasis is on starvation. It's on people in refugee camps. But actually, like Nick is saying, there's a bigger problem. More people suffer and die from malnutrition, for example. So a country like Jordan, 17% of children who die.
Okay, well, just let me ask you all a brief last question, as we're coming towards the end now. Is picking up on that point, is the nature of poverty changing? Because, you know, we hear a lot about the BRIC economies, Brazil, India and so forth, developing. You were mentioning Cairo, huge urban sprawl. Are we looking now at more urban poverty and less rural poverty? And is that, in a way, worse or harder to deal with? Stephen?
Well, I don't know if it's worse or harder to deal with. I think part of the problem with places like sub-Saharan Africa is that there's no infrastructure, so actually it's very difficult to reach people in the rawest and poorest communities. So I think from that perspective, urban poverty will be much easier to tackle. But, you know, global poverty is a hugely complex issue, and as I said at the start, aid isn't the silver bullet to this. I think there has to be an overall global strategy, and what we can't do is sit here and start saying, oh, well, you think aid is good, and I think we should be doing this, and I think we should be doing... It's all part of the same strategy. I mean, we know that all these things are so interconnected that organisations that are working in this area need to come together and find a common way of moving forward and have a common voice when they talk to government about some of the things that you're talking about.
Nick?
I think one of the problems, though, is that a lot of the agencies who are talking about aid are far too interested in fundraising off the back of pictures of starving kids and perpetuating this idea of what poverty is and what poverty looks like. Rather than actually putting themselves on the line and challenging the kind of vested interests in the world that perpetuate poverty and inequality today. And I think that the development sector does bear responsibility for that, and it needs to face up to its responsibilities on that. They've admitted it themselves in various documents they've produced over the last 2 years. If we're not going to put ourselves on the line and challenge vested interests that control our society, we have no hope of doing anything about poverty.
I agree with Nick, and on your question specifically, it'll be interesting to see how these emerging countries, Brazil and India and China, how that will affect some of these multinational organisations like the IMF, the World Bank, because at the moment we know that the power of America and the power of the EU, for example, the European nations, and how that's having an impact. So it'll be interesting perhaps to see with these emerging countries, will we see a shift in policy? Will we see a shift in the relationship between the IMF and the World Bank to sub-Saharan African countries and also to countries in Asia? So that will be interesting. But I think the reality is that I think Nick is absolutely right. We have some structural, fundamental problems. And unless we engage with these problems, unless people go out there and campaign on behalf of these problems and try to bring about real change, I'm worried that we'll be sitting here in 10, 15 years' time still talking about the same problems and still really talking about aid, and I think that would be quite tragic.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining the discussion. Thank you very much for watching. Do join us for future editions of the Politics and Media Show.